everyone, my name is Miss Kim from the Sonoma County Library, and welcome to Book Read-Alouds at Home. Get comfortable and get ready to listen to a chapter book a week read out loud to you. Feel free to check out the ebook from our library website, sonomalibrary.org, so you can follow along, or just relax, close your eyes, and listen. Now, grab your pillow, grab your blanket, get comfortable.
Cinder, Chapter 2. The emergency sirens hadn't faded before a hum of another engine rumbled into the square. The market's silence was split by feet thumping on the pavement, then someone spitting commands. Someone else's guttural response. Slinging her messenger bag across her back, Cinder crept across the dusty floor of her booth and pushed past the tablecloth that draped her work desk. She slipped her fingers into the gap of the light beneath the door and inched it open. Pressing her cheek to the warm, gritty pavement, she was able to make out 3 sets of yellow boots across the square. An emergency crew. She peeled the door farther open and watched the men, all wearing gas masks, as they doused the interior of the booth with liquid from a yellow can. Even across the square, Cinder wrinkled her nose at the stench. "What's happening?" Aiko asked from behind her. "They're going to burn Shanji's booth." Cinder's eyes swept along the square, noting the pristine white hover planted near the corner. Other than the 3 men, the square was abandoned. Rolling onto her back, Cinder peered up into Aiko's sensor, still faintly glowing in the dark. "We'll leave when the flames start, when they're distracted." "Are we in trouble?" "No, I just can't be bothered with a trip to the quarantines today." One of the men spouted an order, followed by shuffling feet. Cinder turned her head and squinted through the gap. A flame was thrown into the booth. The smell of gasoline was soon met with that of burned toast. The men stood back, their uniforms silhouetted against the growing flames. Reaching up, Cinder grabbed Prince Kai's android around its neck and pulled it down behind her. Tucking it under one arm, she slid the door open enough to crawl through, keeping her eyes on the men's backs. Aiko followed, scooting against the next booth as Cinder lowered the door. They darted along the storefronts, most left wide open during the mass exodus, and turned into the first skinny alley between shops. Black smoke blotted the sky above them. Seconds later, hordes of news hovers buzzed around the buildings on their way to the market square. Cinder slowed when they'd put enough distance between them and the market emerging from the maze of alleys. The sun had passed overhead and was descending behind the skyscrapers to the west. The air sweated with August heat, but an occasional warm breeze was funneled between the buildings, picking up whirlwinds of garbage from the gutters. 4 blocks from the market, signs of life appeared again on the streets. Pedestrians pooling on the sidewalks and gossiping about the plague outbreak in the new city center. Net screens implanted into building walls showed live feeds of fire and smoke in downtown New Beijing, and panicked headlines in which the toll of infected mounted by the second, even though only 1 person had been confirmed sick so far. "All of those sticky buns," Aiko said as they passed a closed-up shop of the blackened booth. Cinder bit the inside corner of her cheek. Neither of them had ever sampled the acclaimed sweets of the market bakery. Aiko didn't have taste buds, and Changsha didn't serve cyborgs. Towering offices and shopping centers gradually melded in with a messy assortment of apartment buildings built so close that they became an unending stretch of glass and concrete. Apartments in this corner of the city had once been spacious and desirable, but had been so subdivided and remodeled over time, always trying to cram more people into the same square footage, that the buildings had become labyrinths of corridors and stairwells. But all the crowded ugliness was briefly forgotten as Cinder turned the corner onto her own street. For half a step, New Beijing Palace could be glimpsed between the complexes, sprawling and serene on the cliff that overlooked the city. The palace's pointed gold roofs sparkled orange beneath the sun, the windows glinting the light back at the city. The ornate gables, the tiered pavilions that teetered dangerously close to the cliff's edge, the rounded temples stretching to the heavens. Cinder paused longer than usual to look up at it, thinking about someone who lived behind those walls, someone who was up there perhaps this very second. Not that she had known the prince lived there every time she'd seen the palace before, but today she felt a connection she never had before, and with it came an almost smug delight. She had met the prince. He had come to her booth. He knew her name. Sucking in a breath of humid air, Cinder forced herself to turn away, feeling childish. She was going to start sounding like Peony. She shifted to the royal android onto her arm as she and Aiko ducked beneath the overhang of the Phoenix Tower apartments. She flashed her freed wrist at the ID scanner on the wall and heard the clunking of the lock. Aiko used her arm extensions to clop down the stairs as they descended into the basement, a dim maze of storage spaces caged with chicken wire. As a wave of musty air blew up to meet them, the android turned on her floodlight, dispersing the shadows from the sparse halogens. It was a familiar path from the stairway to the storage space number 1820, the cramped, always chilly cell that Audrey allowed Cinder to use for her work. Cinder cleared a space for the android among the work table's clutter and sent her messenger bag on the floor. She swapped her heavy work gloves for less grungy cotton ones before locking up the storage room. "If Audrey asks," she said as they made their way to the elevators, "our booth is nowhere near the baker's." Aiko's light flickered. "Noted." They were alone in the elevator. It wasn't until they stepped out onto the 18th floor that the building became a crawling hive. Children chasing each other down the corridors, both domestic and stray cats creeping tight against the walls, the ever-constant blur of net screen chatter spilling from the doorways. Cinder adjusted the white noise output from her brain interface as she dodged the children on her way to her apartment. The door was wide open, making Cinder pause and check the number before entering. She heard Audrey's stiff voice from the living room. "Lower neckline for Peony. She looks like an old woman." Cinder peered around the corner. Audrey was standing there with one hand on the mantel of the holographic fireplace, wearing a chrysanthemum-embroidered bathrobe that blended in with the collection of garish paper fans that covered the wall behind her, reproductions made to look antique. With her face shimmering with too much powder and her lips painted horrifically bright, Audrey looked like a reproduction herself. Her face was made up as if she'd been planning to go somewhere, although she rarely left the apartment. If she noticed Cinder loitering in the doorway, she ignored her. The net screen above the heatless lamps showed footage from the market. The baker's booth had been reduced to rubble and the skeleton of a portable oven. In the center of the room, Pearl and Peony each stood swathed in silk and tulle. Peony was holding up her dark curly hair while a woman Cinder didn't recognize fidgeted with her dress's neckline. Peony caught sight of Cinder over the woman's shoulder, and her eyes sparked, a glow bursting across her face. She gestured at the dress with a barely silenced squeal. Cinder grinned back. Her younger stepsister looked angelic, her dress all silver and shimmering, with hints of lavender when caught in the fire's light. "Pearl," Audrey gestured at her older daughter with a twirling finger, and Pearl spun around, displaying a row of pearl buttons down her back. Her dress matched Peony's with its snug bodice and flouncy skirt, only it was made of stardust gold. "Let's take in her waist some more." Threading a pin through the hem of Peony's neckline, the stranger started at seeing Cinder in the doorway, but quickly turned away. Stepping back, the woman removed a bundle of sharp pins from between her lips and tilted her head to one side. "It's already very snug," she said. "We want her to dance, don't we?" "We want her to find a husband," said Audrey. No, the seamstress teetered, even as she reached out and pinched the material around Pearl's waist. Cinder could tell Pearl was sucking in her stomach as much as she could. She detected the edges of the ribs beneath the fabric. "She is much too young for marriage." "I'm 17, Pearl said, glaring at the woman. 17, seeing a child now is for fun, right, girl?" "She is too expensive for fun," said Audrey. "I expect results from this gown." "Do not worry, Linji. She will be lovely as morning dew." Stuffing the pins back into her mouth, the woman returned her focus to Peony's neckline. Audrey lifted her chin and finally acknowledged Cinder's presence by swiping her gaze down at Cinder's filthy boots and cargo pants. "Why aren't you at the market?" "It closed down early today," said Cinder with a meaningful look at the net screen that Audrey didn't follow. Feigning nonchalance, Cinder thrust a thumb towards the hall. "So I'll just go get cleaned up and I'll be ready for my dress fitting." The seamstress paused. "Another dress, Lindsay? I did not bring material for... Have you replaced the mag belt on the hover yet?" Cinder's smile faltered. "No, not yet." "Well, none of us will be going to a ball unless that gets fixed, will we?" Cinder stifled her irritation. They'd already had this conversation twice in the past week. "I need money to buy a new mag belt. 800 univs at least. If income from the market wasn't deposited directly into your account, I would have bought one by now." "And trust you not to spend it all on your frivolous toys?" Audrey said toys with a glare that Iko and a curl of her lips, even though Iko technically belonged to her. "Besides, I can't afford both a mag belt and a new dress that you'll only wear once. You'll have to find some other way of fixing the hover, or find your own gown for the ball." Irritation hardened in Cinder's gut. She might have pointed out that Pearl and Peony could have been given ready-made rather than custom dresses in order to budget for Cinder's as well. She might have pointed out that they would only wear this dress one time too. She might have pointed out that as she was the one doing the work, the money should have been hers to spend as she saw fit. But all arguments would come to nothing. Legally, Cinder belonged to Audrey as much as the household android, and so too did her money, her few possessions, and even the new foot she just attached. Audrey loved to remind her of that. So she stomped the anger down before Audrey could see a spark of rebellion. "I may be able to offer a trade for the mag belt. I'll check with the local shops." Audrey sniffed. "Why don't we trade that worthless android for it?" Iko ducked behind Cinder's leg. "We wouldn't get much for her," said Cinder. "Nobody wants such an old model." "No, they don't, do they? Perhaps I'll have to sell you both off as spare parts." Audrey reached forward and fidgeted with the unfinished hem of Pearl's sleeve. "I don't care how you fix the hover. Just fix it before the ball, and cheaply. I don't need that pile of junk taking up valuable parking space." Cinder tucked her hands into her back pockets. "Are you saying that if I fix the hover and get a dress, I can really go this year?" Audrey's lips puckered slightly at the corners. "It will be a miracle if you find something suitable to wear that will hide your..." Her gaze dropped to Cinder's boots. "Eccentricities. But yes, if you fix the hover, I suppose you can go to the ball." Peony flashed Cinder a stunned half smile while her older sister spun on their mother. "You can't be serious! Her? Go with us?" Cinder pressed her shoulder into the door frame, trying to hide her disappointment from Peony. Pearl's outrage was unnecessary. A little orange light had flickered in the corner of Cinder's vision. Audrey had not meant her promise. "Well," she said, attempting to look heartened, "I guess I better go find a mag belt then." Audrey flourished her arm at Cinder, her attention once again captivated by Pearl's dress, a silent dismissal. Cinder cast one more look at her stepsister's sumptuous gowns before backing out of the room. She had barely turned towards the hallway when Peony squealed, "Prince Kai!" Freezing, Cinder glanced back at the net screen. The plague alerts had been replaced with a live broadcast from the palace's press room. Prince Kai was speaking to a crowd of journalists, human and android. "Volume on," said Pearl, batting the seamstress away. "Research continues to be our top priority," Prince Kai was saying, gripping the sides of a podium. "Our research team is determined to find a vaccine for this disease that has now taken one of my parents and threatens to take the other, as well as tens of thousands of our citizens. The circumstances are made even more desperate in the face of the outbreak that occurred today within city limits. No longer can we claim this disease is relegated to the poor rural communities of our country. Lutemosis threatens us all, and we will find a way to stop it. Only then can we begin to rebuild our economy and return the Eastern Commonwealth to its once prosperous state. Unenthusiastic applause shifted through the crowd. Research on the plague had been underway since the first outbreak had occurred in a small town in the African Union over dozens years ago. It seems that while very little progress has been made, meanwhile, the disease has surfaced in hundreds of seemingly unconnected communities throughout the world. Hundreds of thousands of people had fallen ill, suffered, died. Even Audrey's husband had contracted it on a trip to Europe, the same trip during which he'd agreed to become the guardian of an 11-year-old orphan cyborg. One of Cinder's few memories of the man was him being carted away to the quarantines while Audrey raved at how he could not leave her with this thing. Audrey never talked about her husband, and few memories of him lingered in the apartment. The only reminder that he'd even existed was found in a row of holographic plaques and carved medallions that lined the fireplace's mantel, achievement awards and congratulatory prizes from an international technology fair, 3 years running. Cinder had no idea what he'd invented. Evidently, whatever it was hadn't taken off because he'd left his family almost no money when he died. On the screen, the prince's speech was interrupted when a stranger stepped onto the platform and handed a note to Prince Kai. The prince's eyes clouded over. The screen blackened. The press room was placed with a desk before a blue screen. A woman sat behind it, expressionless, but with whitened knuckles atop the desk. We interrupt His Imperial Highness's press conference with an update on the status of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Rakan. The Emperor's physicians have just informed us that His Majesty has entered into the 3rd stage of lutemosis. Gasping, the seamstress pulled the pins from her mouth. Cinder pressed herself against the doorframe. She had not even thought to give Kai her condolences or wish for the Emperor's return of health. He must think her so insensitive, so ignorant. We are told that everything is being done to ensure His Imperial Majesty's comfort at this time, and palace officials will tell us that researchers are working non-stop in their search for a vaccine. Volunteers are still urgently needed for an antidote testing. Even the cyborg draft continues. There has been much controversy regarding the 126th annual Peace Festival due to the Emperor's illness, but Prince Kaito has told the press that the festival will continue as scheduled and that he hopes it might bring some joy in this otherwise tragic time. The anchor paused, hesitating, even with the prompter before her. Her face softened and her stiff voice had a warble when she finished. "Long live the Emperor!" The seamstress murmured the words back to the anchor. The screen went black again before returning to the press conference, but Prince Kai had left the stage, and the audience of journalists were in an upheaval as they reported to their individual cameras. "I know a cyborg who could volunteer for plague testing," say Pearl. "Why wait for the draft?" Cinder leveled a glare at Pearl, who was nearly 6 inches shorter than she was, despite being a year older. "Good idea," she said, "and then you could get a job to pay for your pretty dress." Prince Pearl snarled. "They reimbursed the volunteers' families, wirehead." The cyborg draft had been started by some royal research team a year ago. Every morning a new ID number was drafted from the pool of so many thousand cyborgs who resided in the Eastern Commonwealth. Subjects had been carted in from provinces as far-reaching as Mumbai and Singapore to act as guinea pigs for the antidote testing. It was made out to be some sort of honor, giving your life for the good of humanity. But it was really just a reminder that cyborgs were not like everyone else. Many of them had been given a second chance at life by the generous hands of scientists, and therefore owned their very existence to those who had created them. They were lucky to have lived this long, many thought. It's only right that they should be the first to give up their lives and search for the cure. "We can't volunteer, Cinder," said Peony, bunching her skirt in her hands. "I need her to fix my port screen." Pearl sniffed and turned away from the both of them. Peony scrunched her nose at her sister's back. "Stop bickering," said Audrey. "Peony, you're wrinkling your skirt." Cinder stepped back into the hallway as the seamstress returned to her work. Aiko was already 2 steps ahead of her, eager to escape Audrey's presence. She appreciated Peony coming to her defense, of course, but she knew in the end it wouldn't matter. Audrey would never volunteer her for the testing because that would be the end of her only income, and Cinder was sure her stepmother had never worked a day in her life. But if the draft chose her, no one could do anything about it. and it seemed that lately a disproportionate number of those chosen were from New Beijing and the surrounding suburbs. Every time one of the draft's victims was a teenage girl, Cinder imagined a clock ticking inside her head. End of chapter 2.
Thank you everyone for joining me. Check back weekly for more read-alouds. We'll have new ones posted every week. And be sure to check out our website, sonomalibrary.org, for up-to-date resources and information. We miss you all. Stay safe. And remember, make reading a part of every day, even if it's just for a few minutes. And have fun with it.